Welcome everyone to the Real Estate Experience. Super excited as always to have you on. Those of you on the YouTube, you know the next steps. Hit that notification bell as well as subscribe would really mean the world. In each and every one of these episodes, we bring on guests as well as I do an experience share of really behind the scenes of how these deals are put together. That way you can avoid the potholes and mistakes and also replicate these successes as well. So today we've got Shawn DiMartile on. I got that right this time around. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Sterling. I really appreciate it. Ready to talk some real estate.
All right, let's go ahead and jump right into it. And so Shawn is one of the co-founders at the company, the Multifamily Takeoff Partners. Love that in terms of that title of that company. Mm-hmm. He owns multifamily property in San Diego as well as throughout the Midwest. And one fun fact about him is he tends to go backpacking in the wilderness, minimalist, you could say in a way, and
that's right.
Getting rid of all the phones and just going out there and just enjoying themselves. So Shawn, could you give everyone just a little bit about what's your 5% in terms of your background that's ultimately shaped you to who you are today and how you're able to get into real estate?
Okay, absolutely. So I'll give you the medium link story. Essentially, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was going to college for a while. I needed to get out of that city, needed to find a job that was going to produce enough income to live the life I wanted. I stumbled across air traffic control as a job, and typically people that get into that gig join the military first, get their experience. So that's exactly the path that I took. So I joined the United States Navy. I was in the Navy for 5 years as an air traffic controller. That brought me out to San Diego, California. And I did that for 5 years, got out, got hired by the FAA as an air traffic controller, which I still do as my W-2 job right now.
And how old were you at this time, Shawn?
So I joined the Navy at 21 years old. And then, like I said, I spent 5 years doing that. So I get out at about 26 years old, get hired by the FAA for my full-time job, which was my dream job at the time. And along the way, I started to make a better income in the civilian world. And I really wanted to invest some money. I was like, okay, I've been saving some money. And I'm talking to a friend at a coffee shop, actually. And I'm telling him about this. And he's a realtor. And he said, hey, you should really go to this, start listening to this podcast called Bigger Pockets, which I'm willing to bet a lot of your listeners have heard of before.
If not, definitely you guys get on there. It's free. Either one of us are affiliated. It's a phenomenal tool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's an easy, free tool to learn just about anything you need to learn about real estate. So I started really going down the rabbit hole, listening to podcasts on Bigger Pockets. And this is, probably, I'm 31 years old now. This is probably 4 years ago that I started going down that rabbit hole. So, and then one thing led to another. And at the end of every episode on that podcast, they asked what their favorite real estate book is. And I would just hear a favorite real estate book. I would immediately buy it. I'd read it. And then I'd just keep doing that over and over and over again. And I just got to this point where I was reading as many real estate books as I get my hands on, which is funny because I was never really a reader before. Like before this, like in college and stuff, I wasn't really super studious. I didn't care too much. I had to.
You didn't enjoy it because the subjects that were thrown at you, forced.
Exactly. Exactly. I wasn't, on fire for something. And then this totally changed my whole perspective on that. And I became a reader. And then I was just reading fast. And I was just like going through these books. And so that started that process. And what essentially happened is I started looking for single families. And I wasn't really finding deals that penciled out. And this
was in the San Diego market?
Well, I started in the San Diego market trying to find deals that might pencil out. I quickly learned that that's really not going to happen in this market. I mean, most of us are in this game for cash flow, and cash flowing in a coastal market like San Diego is just largely not going to happen, very rarely.
Negative cash flow.
Yeah, actually, I know a lot of people that own properties negative cash flow, and they think that's great. And so then I started to look in my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, where it's very possible to cash flow. Then, the single family game, I was realizing, okay, wait a minute, maybe I do need to make the jump to multifamily. Started looking for small multifamilies. Long story short, my two partners today are Rich Summers and Mike Ty, and we all three are air traffic controllers. And we, said, hey, wait a minute. None of us are finding like great deals, but if we all put our money together and buy a multifamily property, a larger multifamily property, that's going to be the catalyst to get us in the multifamily game. We'll learn a lot, and it's going to be way better than anything we can do on our own. And that's pretty much how the partnership got started right there.
Gotcha.
Rest is
Awesome.
history.
And I want to go back is why real estate through all this?
The reason why real estate is I think that I learned very quickly that the power of real estate. I mean, you listen to podcasts all day and read books, and you can hear how it transforms people's lives much, much quicker than most other asset classes. And what I really liked about it is that you have control. When I was trying to learn about like investing in stocks or, getting index funds or something like that, you essentially have no control. You could pick what stocks you want to invest in and do a lot of research on that. And the extent of your control is, placing your bet like it's, a casino on a particular company that you think whoever's controlling that company is going to continue doing a good job. And that's pretty much it. You don't really have any control over the investment, and somebody else is going to either make or break your investment for you. And I didn't really like that. Whereas with real estate, I liked how I can go in, I can fix up a property, I can add value to it myself, and I feel safe and comfortable that if I add enough value, I'm going to make money on the property.
Got it. Love it. And how, I know you mentioned you were on the Bigger Pockets, and each and every, after they would mention a book, you would go through the book and start reading the content. How were you able to, did you encounter any analysis paralysis, or did you just start taking action while simultaneously educating yourself?
I just started taking action because I was so excited. I was so excited about what I was reading, and I wanted to, as quickly as possible, reach financial freedom. Financial independence, retire early, FIRE. That was my goal from the very get-go. So I immediately started taking action. And one of the books that probably had one of the biggest effects on me was The Best Ever Syndication book by Joe Fairless. And the reason why is because in that book, Joe Fairless really lays down a plan. He lays down the instructions for how you can get from having no money and no contacts to having using other people's money to syndicate apartments. And part of that whole path, he talks about, building your brands, but doing that by starting a podcast or YouTube, starting your own meetup, really just creating content and putting yourself out there. And I basically looked at that like you would look at like an instruction booklet for an IKEA.
A blueprint or a recipe.
Exactly. So I would say, okay, he says, start a podcast or something. So my partners and I talked and we said, hey, you guys want to just do this and let's start a podcast, see how it goes. And boom, everybody was like, all right, let's do it. He talked about starting a meetup. We started a meetup. Now we have about 50 people each meetup that show up to our meetup. And just one thing after another, like I said, it's like reading the instructions. Okay. And as we implemented all this stuff, it worked. Like right away, it started working. And so my advice to anyone that's listening, all your listeners that are wondering how they can replicate that, do the same thing. There's other people that have done this before you, and they've literally put the blueprint out there for you. If you follow it, you're likely to succeed. If you're saying, hey, it's just now, I can't figure out why I can't find somebody else to potentially invest with, or I can't make this work. Well, did you do everything that what you were supposed to do? Because if you did, I think it'll be a lot easier.
Gotcha. And why do you believe, or how was it that you were able to take the material and take action versus others? What do you think it is that is the main hiccup? And I really just want to get your insights from that, because I feel that's where most people get stuck in terms of they read all this material and they have all the education, but they never take the action.
I think that what I'm going to guess is that a lot of people out there think that it's such a big move and such a big endeavor that maybe there's a little bit of fear involved. It's like you're on the ledge and you're about to, jump off, or like we're air traffic controllers, right?
And that's the
Multifamily Takeoff.
And that's the people that do the little hints.
No, that we're up in the tower, or we're in a radar air traffic control room where we're just looking at a radar scope and we're controlling little targets on the screen.
Okay, the whole time you were saying the air traffic control, I was like, is he directing people with it?
That's okay, because that's pretty common. People are like, oh, you're the guy that's like doing this. Like, no, that's not us. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, a lot of people, right when when they're getting close to the point where they can make a big move, I think they're maybe very fearful, because it is a drastic thing to do, to put either that much money up to make it happen, or the fear that maybe if something goes wrong, you're on the hook for it. But another thing that I think stops people from getting started is that it really does require you. This is a people business, and it really does require you to put yourself out there. If you're an introvert and maybe going to a meetup is a little tough for you, or cold calling somebody's a little tough for you, talking to strangers and introducing yourself is difficult. I think that that's something that is a skill you're going to need to slowly build up, because that's a requirement in this business.
Or find someone. It's
true.
just, find a partner. You have two other partners, and I just feel most people, I want to chime in on this, want to come up with excuses, but there's always a way to overcome it. And it's just looking at it is, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Or you just have to have that large enough why ultimately, because you'll figure out a way. And I love the quote by Grant Cardone that says, creativity follows commitment. So you're committed enough, you'll find a creative way to overcome those excuses.
Absolutely. Here's a good example. My partner, Rich Summers, he is excellent at communicating, talking with people. He's very welcoming kind of a guy. He's the perfect person for putting in front of brokers, talking to brokers, bringing in people to the business. And that I'm not very good at that. I'm not very good at reaching out to brokers, communicating with them, just shooting the crap with them and trying to get them to send us deals. So we've got Rich designated as the guy that does that for us. So I found a partner that kind of fills that hole, fills that void, has a skill that I don't have, and put him into that role. So I think for somebody out there that's listening and maybe they're thinking the same thing, like, I don't know if I could ever get that skill. Like you suggested, find somebody that does have it then, and maybe consider partnering.
Yeah, and most people say, "Well, I don't want to give up equity in my company." It's like, oh my god, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
it's just you gotta fit.
Maybe giving up some equity is better than not having any equity because you don't have a deal.
Yeah, exactly. Or what you could do is you could compensate them, but if you don't have the cash, this is where the creativity. You just have to figure it out at the end of the day.
Find a way. If you want it bad enough, you'll find a way. That's one of the quotes that I always love.
Love it. And so, Shawn, what has been one failure that you've experienced in the industry that later set you up for success?
Ooh, here's a good one. First thing that comes to mind is getting a property on a contract that we had to back out on. This was a 48-unit contract we had to back out on. And this was very early on in our partnership. We thought we had found this great deal in Oklahoma City. It was for like 30-something K a door. At first glance, the neighborhood seemed like it was going to be an okay neighborhood. There was like a Buca de Beppo right next to it and an Olive Garden and stuff. But that was about, 200 yards down the road, which it made a big difference because this neighborhood was not a good neighborhood.
Got it.
We get this property under contract. We're doing our due diligence, and we start to learn that it's a really bad property and neighborhood for, gang violence and just violence in general.
Was it on the upswing at all in terms of?
It was not. It was not on the upswing. It was stagnant in the bad swing. And so we actually had trouble getting property managers to sign off on the deal and be interested in actually managing the property. So, for example, we had one property manager that initially sounded interested, but then when they actually went and visited the property, they backed out and said, "We won't even manage this property. We don't feel safe sending our personnel to that property to work on it." And so that was just this huge red flag for us, obviously. We were thinking initially, well, we're getting it for so cheap and occupancy was a little low that we can turn this thing around. We can get the occupancy up as a value add play, fix up the units a little bit, increase the rent a little bit. I mean, we had all these ideas for generating more income on the property. But at the end of the day, this was something that we just weren't ready for, to start, basically with the D property. So we backed out of that and told the broker that, we're no longer interested in the property. And we immediately got out of that in the due diligence process. But what I learned through that is that, you've got to really, really research your market, your property, and spend a lot of time. Nowadays, we pay for data services like Neighborhood Scout and Noto, things like that, to really analyze neighborhoods, find out what the crime rate is, find out what the median household income is, how are the schools. We get all of this information now before we even make an offer on a property. We have it all down on a sheet so that we can make a better informed decision and we never make that mistake again.
And what was that source one more time for the audience?
Neighborhood Scout and Noto. Neighborhood Scout, have you ever heard of that one?
No, I have not.
So Neighborhood Scout is a paid service. It is a little bit expensive. You'll pay about $100 a month. And what that will do is you could type in an address and it'll give you a very localized neighborhood for that address. And it will give you all kinds of demographic information. Like I said, it'll tell you the median household income in the neighborhood, which is a very good indicator for a lot of reasons. It'll tell you the crime rates, and it'll compare all these statistics to the national average, which kind of helps you make your decision making. It'll give you the schools, and then it could also break it down further into how the housing trends have been there. All sorts of
more
stuff.
owner occupied versus non-owner occupied renters, or
yeah, it'll tell you all that. It'll tell you what the average rental increase has been over the past couple of years. It'll tell you how crime is trending, because crime could be bad, but if it's trending upward and the neighborhood's gentrifying, there's a lot of things to look into, and it gives you a load of information. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Love that. And one thing that I really like that you went into in terms of D property, from experience, I've purchased D property and you could say the quote unquote the hood, and it looks good on paper, but in terms of translating to the actual real world, it could be very management intensive. And this was on the single family side. So when the property would go vacant, you're more susceptible to vandalism. Someone goes in there, rips out the electrical, the copper, and then also steals the furniture. So those are all the things you have to take into consideration. Also, what you experienced was property management companies like, nah, I really don't want to touch that or even attempt to manage it.
Yeah, exactly. And property management company, when you're dealing with like a 48 unit, something of that size, that's going to make or break your property or your deal. So I do exactly. When you're talking about those D-class properties that really need a lot of attention, you've got to really know what you're doing. So I don't recommend that for a first timer or a beginner. That is much more advanced in my opinion.
Agreed. And so for Shawn, what has been one belief, let's say a limiting belief, that you've replaced with a more empowering one, let's say over the past 5 to 7 years?
I think one of the limiting beliefs that I replaced with a more empowering one was that I'm really capable of doing anything, and don't short myself. And I've shorted myself so many times. Like even when we were thinking about getting this 32 unit, this was our first deal, I was a little bit hesitant at first with my partner. I was like, I don't know, guys. Like, I mean, are we going to be able to get enough money? We were actually short $100,000, and I didn't think we were going to be able to raise the money. But one of my partners kept, like, especially Rich, kept saying, no, we can do this. Let's talk to some people at our meetup. Maybe somebody at our meetup will come in on the deal with us. Sure enough, they did. It worked. And even coming up, we're like I've said before, we're working on one of our big syndications coming. We're looking at properties in the 200 plus unit range. Awesome. And there's been times where I was like, man, are we really going to, I know we could raise most of this money, but there's this gap that I'm not 100% sure we're going to be able to raise for on such a large raise. But then, I've started to stop myself and say, why can't we? We have a podcast with thousands of listeners. Why can't we advertise? This is going to be a 506c raise. Why can't we advertise on there and raise people? Why can't we reach back out to our network and our meetup and find a couple more people? There's so many ways. Why can't we advertise on social media? So now I try to no longer say, I don't think we could do that. I try to get that limiting belief out, 10x what I think I can do, and reach for the stars.
Love it. And that was True Bombs. You guys definitely want to go back and have a bag, whether that's a Kroger bag or grocery bag or something, and pick up those golden nuggets. Everyone's like, where is he going with this? But in essence, I love how you have the different question. And this was one thing I learned from Russell Wilson when he talked about when he was, because he's a 5'10" quarterback, which normally it's about 6'3", 6'4" in terms of the average quarterback. He said, why not me? So very similar question to you asking yourself, why can't I, is a way of overcoming whatever that barrier happens to be. So love that. And The next, in terms of finding deals, are you going direct to owner? Are you going through broker?
Yeah, so we're going through broker. So primarily the way that we're getting deals funneled to us right now is Rich, who is our broker point of contact. He's reaching out to all the top brokers. So we'll find, we're primarily looking at markets like Louisville, Kentucky, Lexington, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and even a little bit in Tennessee. And so that right there in the heart of the Midwest / quote unquote Southeast. And what we do is we'll look up the top brokers for CBRE, for Marcus and Millichap, et cetera, call the top guys, start having conversations with them, and then hit them every week. Rich gets on the phone with them, see how they're doing, see how the market's looking. Do they have any new deals that are meeting our criteria? We always give them our criteria, follow up with an email, and sure enough, they'll start sending us deals. And networking with brokers are really the gatekeepers in this business. You can go directly to owners, and that is a good way of getting deals too. We haven't really done much of that. But, when it comes to brokers, it's just making sure that they realize you're legit, and then constantly keeping up with them. And that's bringing in our deal flow right now.
Yeah. So this is one question that I often see is the chicken and the egg approach is brokers want to see that you've closed on deals. However, when you're just getting started and you want to get a deal from a broker, how did you guys end up approaching that?
That's a good question. So that is the toughest part because in this business, experience is weighted so heavily in their algorithm of whether or not they're going to trust you and want to work with you. So the way we overcame that was we just front loaded our conversation with them with everything that we had behind us to try and show that they could trust us and that we can close. So for example, we had already been doing our podcast for a little while at this time. We had our money ready to go. So we already had a property manager lined up. So what we would do is we would contact these brokers, this is in the beginning before our first property. And we'd be like, hey, how's it going? If Rich is calling, I'm Rich Summers. I'm an investor out of San Diego, California. We're looking to expand into some Midwest markets. I'm co-host of this Multifamily Takeoff podcast. Here's a link to one of our episodes. We've been, talking multifamily with a lot of the top syndicators in the game. Here's our criteria that we're looking for. We already have a property manager on lock in this region that's ready to roll on a property that's between 17 and 40 units. We can prove that we have funds available to close on this deal. We're ready to rock. If you get us a deal that meets our criteria, we're ready to move quickly. And so we would try to answer whatever questions they might have in their head right away so that there's no question that these guys are serious. And we would do that by showing we have enough money. We're ready to go. We could prove that we have the money if you want proof of funds. We don't have a huge portfolio. So we would just try to show look, we've got experience in this game a little bit with our podcast, and we're very serious about making moves. And just anything that we could do to try to warm them up to the fact that we're not going to just be some jokesters that don't know what they're doing. And then what kind of solidified that is at first they started sending us really bad deals. Really bad deals. We would get deals literally right next to the poop factory in town. That was you could literally see it from Google Maps, right next to it. And it would be a bad neighborhood. We're like, okay, this is definitely not going to work. But what we would do is as quickly as possible, underwrite the property and then send our underwriting to the broker. And so we found that really showed the broker that we kind of knew what we were talking about, because we would give them our neighborhood scout report and we would detail everything about the neighborhood that we didn't like. We'd say, okay, well then this, median household income in this neighborhood is $30,000. We're looking for something $40,000 or more. The crime in this neighborhood is on a scale of 1 to 10, it might be a 3. We're looking for something of 4 or greater. We're looking for, we'll just keep going down the list. And then we would actually send him our spreadsheet and say, this is what we're coming up with and why it doesn't really work for us. If you could keep sending us some deals, we'll let you know as soon as something works. And that helped our credibility as well.
Got it. And one thing I want to mention, you guys, it's all sales. And what I've gotten from you is you're taking as much credibility, and what you have is leverage to ultimately build your credibility with the broker. Hey, this is the property management company. This is our podcast. And I really want to go into the whole personal branding element. And that's good that you mentioned you're using the blueprint, because you guys, personal branding is huge. It's brokers or even owners or sellers will Google you. And if you have a podcast, if you have content out there, that just raises your credibility over others who do not have the experience. So in terms of you guys, do you market through each of yourselves individually as a personal brand, or do you market through your company, the Multifamily Takeoff Partners?
We market through the Multifamily Takeoff Partners, and we've really amped it up even more lately. So we've got our podcast, we've got our meetup, and at the meetup, we started by just putting our content out at the meetup. We would actually made this big banner that was we got made from some company, and we could set it up on this like tripod that would say, "Hey, Multifamily Takeoff Podcast," and that way everybody that walks through the meetup would see that and hopefully download it or what have you. And so early on, that's kind of how we built both of those two things. And we just kept reaching for the biggest fish that we could find for our podcast, because we knew that the bigger fish we brought on the podcast, the bigger guests, the higher likelihood that they would then share that episode with their network and then potentially bring us new listeners. So we were reaching out immediately for like Jake and Gino, Michael Blanc, Grant Cardone. I mean, we just kept going down the list of people that were already some larger, well-known podcasts.
Sterling White.
Now we got Sterling White on there. So when we talk to a broker, we're like, "Hey, listen to this episode of Sterling White, man." So yeah. And we progressed, right? We progressed from bigger and bigger guests to eventually Sterling White.
Over GC, over Grant. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and so building the brand is just, now we're actually advertising on social media. So we're spending, a couple $1,000s a month advertising the podcast on social media. And it's actually bringing more listeners. It's working. Advertising works, believe it or not. And we believe that the more we can grow the listeners base, the more people are hearing what we're talking about, the more trust we're going to build within the community, the more we're going to be able to bring on big name guests, which just helps us build that brand.
Got it. And the one thing I want to mention is such a small world. I was on their podcast, the Multifamily Takeoff, and they're talking about a deal here in Indianapolis that they closed on. And we talked through all the logistics. I was like, oh, I remember that deal. So it's a very small world. So it's
very small world.
Yeah. And so let's go ahead and move on to the rapid fire sharing round. The first one is, what is one unusual habit or absurd thing that you love to do?
Well, the one unusual, absurd thing that I like to do is what you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, which is I like to go out into the wilderness for 5-6 days at a time backpacking. That's not really a habit. That's just kind of, a hobby, but a lot of people would consider it absurd because you've got to pack in your food. You've got to bring a water purification system. And I like to go into like Yosemite or Sequoia and like climb mountains and then like come back, 5 or 6 days later when I'm pretty much out of supplies.
Fair enough. You're not going around doing any hunting or anything, or just? I'm
not doing that level. Like I'm not like on that show like Alone or something like that where I'm bringing in a bow and I'm like catching my own food. But it is pretty gnarly. I will say that.
Got it. That could be another level. But what is one common myth that you hear in the industry that you can debunk?
Ooh, one common myth that you can hear in the industry. Wow. That's a tough one. I would say one myth that I hear in this industry that I'll just go ahead and debunk right now is that, and it's kind of a myth. I mean, you've heard this debunked before, but that you need money to get started in this business. Okay. I don't believe that you do. I mean, I had some money to get started in this business, but I've heard too many stories now through my podcast and other podcasts of people getting started with absolutely no money.
I had negative funds, so even worse.
So I think that anybody out there listening, because it's a myth that I hear repeated whenever I talk to people at my meetup, and they're giving me reasons why they haven't started yet, and it's because they don't have any money. Well, that's just an excuse at this point, because it's been proven too many times that you don't need money.
And what has been one gift given to you that's been the most impactful that was under $100?
Ooh, I would say easily the most impactful gift that's been given to me that's completely changed my life was simply a recommendation from that friend at that coffee shop one day to listen to the Bigger Pockets podcast. If he hadn't have, given me that gift of just a tip, then I wouldn't be on this podcast with you right now.
Wow. It just opened the doors. And this last but not least is, why do you believe we're here on Earth?
Wow. Why do I believe we're here on earth? I believe we're here on earth to try and do the best we can to live a life that's full, that's giving to others, that's loving, and this to the fullest of the best of our ability.
Okay, awesome. Well, where can people find you, Shawn?
You can find me by going to the multifamilytakeoff.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Shawn DiMartile, ShawnDimartile. And you can reach me out to me on either of those. And you could also check out our podcast if you get some time, the Multifamily Takeoff.
Yeah, definitely would recommend it, you guys, in terms of listening to their podcast. And so, as you know, next steps, if you haven't already, go ahead, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Those of you on YouTube, other channels, leave that rating. It would really mean the world. Thanks so much for being on this episode, Shawn.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you for having me.
All righty. Have a great one, everyone. Keep being awesome. Thanks for listening to The Real Estate Experience. If this has brought you any value, please subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to me. Now go out there and crush it.